She thought she was protecting the neighborhood. But when police responded to her 911 call about a suspicious black man, they didn't find a criminal, they found something that turned the entire block upside down. What began as a false alarm would soon expose secrets the neighborhood had buried for years. The sun hung low over the manicured lawns of Briarwood Estates, casting a golden haze over rows of identical homes with polished shutters and HOA-approved hedges. Pamela Whitaker stood on her porch in a peach cardigan, one hand clutching her phone, the other shielding her eyes. Her voice, sharp and urgent, cut through the warm evening air. "Yes, hello, there's a man at 317 Edgewood. He's messing with the door, drilling something. I don't recognize him. He looks suspicious." Across the street, Elijah James crouched at the doorstep of a beige two-story home. He moved with quiet precision, tucking wires behind trim, tightening a bracket on the siding. A branded van was parked neatly at the curb, and a clipboard rested on the steps with the client's signed service order. Elijah didn't notice Pamela at first. He was focused, earbuds in, nodding faintly to a podcast about AI ethics. Pamela, however, noticed everything. His hoodie, his skin, the fact that he hadn't knocked. "I think he's trying to break in," she told the dispatcher. "No, I didn't ask him. I didn't feel safe. Can you just send someone, please?" Elijah looked up as a breeze stirred the trees, brushing a curl from his forehead. He glanced at the time. 4:52. The homeowner had said they'd be back by 5. He stood, stretching his back, and reached for the small smart doorbell unit resting on the steps. 3 houses down, a garage door rumbled open. A dog barked once. Somewhere, a lawn sprinkler ticked into motion. Pamela stayed on the line until she heard the sirens. They came fast. 2 cruisers, lights flashing but no sirens, rolling up with practiced ease. The doors popped open in near unison, and 2 officers stepped out. One was young, his face still creased from the academy. The other, older, grayer, eyes scanning the street with the caution of someone who's seen what people hide behind picket fences. Pamela waved from her porch, like she was welcoming old friends. "That's him," she said, pointing. "He's still there." Elijah turned slowly, confused but composed. The older officer approached, hand near his holster but not drawn. "Sir," he called out, "mind telling us what you're doing here?" Elijah raised his hands slightly, fingers open. "Sure, I'm installing a smart doorbell. Work orders right here." He gestured calmly to the clipboard. Pamela crossed the street now, arms folded. "I didn't know," she insisted. "It just looked strange. You can't be too careful these days." The young officer picked up the clipboard, scanned it. His eyes flicked to the address, then to the van, then to Elijah's company badge clipped to his belt. He frowned. The older officer asked for ID. Elijah provided it. Smooth, professional, nothing was adding up the way Pamela thought it would. And the first crack in the story had just begun to show. The drill in Elijah's hand paused mid-spin as the 2 officers approached. One was tall, late 50s, with a sun-leathered face and the kind of posture that said he'd seen his fair share of complaints. The other was younger, fresh uniform, crisp creases, eyes still quick with uncertainty. They didn't rush. They didn't need to. The neighborhood had already made up its mind. Pamela hovered nearby, her arms folded tightly, jaw set like she was bracing for applause. "There," she said, gesturing toward Elijah. "That's him. Said he's installing something, but I've never seen him here before." The older officer, badge reading Sergeant Mallory, lifted a brow. "This your house?" he asked Elijah. Elijah shook his head. "No, sir. Just installing a Ring Pro 2. Homeowner scheduled the appointment for today. Said he'd be back around 5. He held up the drill, then the camera still in its box. His voice was steady, but not rehearsed. Just clear. Mallory eyed the van parked out front. Branded, license plate clean. He turned back toward Pamela. "You said he was tampering with the door. I saw him messing with wires." Pamela replied quickly. "Didn't look normal." The younger officer, Moralic, stepped closer, crouched near the box. Elijah had opened. Inside was a manual, labeled parts, screws still neatly packaged. He didn't say anything at first, just scanned the front door, then looked back at Elijah's ID badge. Elijah handed him his driver's license without being asked. "Ever been arrested, Mr. James?" Mallory asked casually. Elijah's brow furrowed, but he kept his tone even. "No, sir." Moralic kept watching him, but not like Pamela did. It was different. Not fear, not suspicion, curiosity. He turned slightly, tapping his radio, asking dispatch to confirm the work order. A pause, then a crackle. "Confirmed," the voice on the other end said. "Elijah James, listed technician for Secure Smart. Owner Alan Rutledge. Scheduled at 4:30 p.m. Mallory didn't react, just nodded slowly, eyes still fixed on Elijah, like he didn't quite believe the voice in his ear. But Moralic was still looking at the doorbell box, the van's dashboard camera, and then the app open on Elijah's phone. That's when he saw it. A feed, live already recording from a separate location. Not this house, not this block. Another property entirely. Moralic blinked, leaned closer. "What's this one?" he asked, pointing. Elijah glanced down. "That's for a previous install. Same company, all cloud-linked." Moralic squinted. The address on the screen had a red flag, a place he'd seen pop up in a briefing last week. "Hey Sarge," he said quietly. Mallory didn't look at him yet. He was still focused on the man with the drill, but Moralic had already seen enough to know. Something about this job wasn't routine, and Elijah James wasn't the one who needed to be watched. Elijah didn't flinch. He pulled his wallet from his back pocket, unfolded it slowly, and handed over his license and company badge in one smooth motion. Then, with the same quiet precision, he opened his phone and tapped into the Secure Smart app, pulling up the job order with a timestamp, address, and client signature. Officer Moralic studied each item carefully. The badge was real, the ID checked out, and the app wasn't some makeshift screenshot. It was live, interactive, and synced with company servers. He turned toward the house, then back to the screen, cross-checking the address. 317 Edgewood, he said into his radio, requesting verification on service order. Owner name, Alan Rutledge. A brief pause followed. Static hummed, then a dispatcher responded. Affirmative. Work order confirmed for that address. Technician, Elijah James. Pamela stood to the side now, arms still crossed, but her confidence thinning. She glanced at Moralic, then back at Elijah, who hadn't moved, still calm, still quiet. "That's what I've been trying to say," Elijah said. "I install these every day. Sometimes the client isn't home. They give access, I do the job, they check it remotely later." Mallory gave a short grunt, like he wasn't impressed. But Moralic wasn't done. He walked a few paces away, still holding the ID. Something didn't sit right, not with Elijah, but with the house. It was too quiet. No signs of a family, no cars in the driveway. The lawn trimmed, but too perfect. Lived in, but untouched. He keyed the radio again. "Can you run the homeowner, Alan Rutledge, see if anything pops?" The line went quiet longer this time. Mallory shot him a look, just a flick of the eyes. Caution, then confirming flag on property, not individual, sealed file, federal access only. No details available. Moralic straightened slightly. Pamela blinked. "What does that mean?" Mallory cut in fast. "Means it's above our clearance. Let's not jump to conclusions." But Moralic couldn't let it go. "Sarge, that's a federal seal. That doesn't show up for noise complaints." Mallory's voice dropped just enough for Pamela not to catch. "We're not chasing ghosts today. There's no warrant, no probable cause. Let it go." But Moralic had already seen it, a shadow of something bigger. Elijah, unaware of the radio chatter, returned to his work slowly. He wasn't in a hurry. He knew how moments like these played out. Be still, be clear, don't escalate. But the younger officer's mind was moving now. It wasn't about the man on the porch anymore. It was about the house, and whatever had been buried beneath that freshly painted front door. Moralic didn't sleep well that night. Something about the call kept gnawing at him. The house, the name, that sealed file. So he dug. At first it was just curiosity, pulling public records, cross-checking property deeds. But within minutes, the pieces started clicking. The house at 317 Edgewood had changed hands 4 times in 6 years. All cash sales, no mortgage, no lender trail, and each time, the buyer listed a different LLC. each registered to the same mailing address in Delaware. The kind of shell game used to hide something, or someone. By sunrise, Moralic had found the name behind them all: Alan Rutledge. On paper, he was a real estate consultant. In reality, he was something else entirely. 4 states had open investigations tied to Rutledge's companies: identity theft, wire fraud, forged signatures, property flipping schemes targeting foreclosed homes. One case even linked him to a private contractor accused of laundering stolen tech through dummy installations, which brought him back to Elijah. The smart doorbell unit. It wasn't a regular one. The secure smart model being installed had encrypted backup protocols. Footage wasn't just saved locally. It was uploaded to a server, a secure one. And according to a buried memo, Moralic, found in an interagency database, that same server had been pinged during a federal cybercrime investigation 6 months earlier. Moralic sat back in his chair, hands on his knees, staring at the monitor. Elijah wasn't a suspect, but he had just unknowingly wired a federal surveillance target's front porch with a direct line to a flagged server, which meant one of 2 things. Either Rutledge was preparing to run, or preparing to hide something big. The next morning, Moralic requested a quiet call with a contact at the bureau. No report. Just a heads up. A tech was seen installing high-end surveillance at a flagged property. 2 hours later, that same contact called back. Secure smart server was already on our radar, the agent said. We didn't realize, someone just reactivated the link. Your guy might have just opened the next chapter of this case. Moralic hung up, mind racing. Elijah had no clue. He'd walked into a web, and didn't even know the threads were there. And Pamela, the woman who tried to frame him, had accidentally pointed a spotlight straight at a deeper truth. Moralic sat with that for a long moment. The smart doorbell Elijah had installed didn't just capture video, it triggered a federal alert. And what started as a call rooted in bias, had just cracked open a case built on lies. Pamela's voice cut through the late afternoon air, like a splinter. I don't understand why he's still here, she snapped, arms flailing now, posture no longer composed. I told you, he was tampering with the house. You seriously just letting him go? Elijah stood quietly by the van, now finished with the install. His hands were clean, his drill back in its case. He didn't say a word, just watched. The officers weren't looking at him anymore. Moralic stepped aside, one hand on his radio. His voice was low but firm. This is Unit 14, requesting additional personnel. Possible federal involvement. Property at 317 Edgewood needs to be secured. Pamela heard it. Her rant faltered. Wait, what are you talking about? Sergeant Mallory didn't answer. He was pacing near the side of the house now, eyes narrowed, scanning windows, checking sightlines. His demeanor had changed, no longer dismissive, no longer relaxed. There was something underneath it now, caution, maybe even concern. A 3rd patrol unit pulled up minutes later. 2 plainclothes officers emerged, speaking quietly with Moralic. One held a tablet, the other held a portable scanner. They moved with quiet precision, not for a noise complaint, not for trespassing, for something heavier. Pamela stepped toward them. You can't just search someone's home. No one's searching anything. Moralic replied, his tone clipped. We're securing the perimeter. That's all for now. But even as he spoke, one officer glanced through a side window and froze. Something's running, he said. Server tower, lights active. They called it in. An hour later, a black SUV rolled up without sirens. Department issued. FBI plates. Elijah, now sitting on the van's bumper, looked up and exhaled. Inside, the homeowner's office told a different story than the front porch had. Behind the bookshelves were false panels, hidden drives, labeled flash sticks, network switches humming softly under the desk. What looked like a basic home office was in reality a data hub. Files filled the screen, dozens of them. Surveillance footage, property transfers, internal memos, some dated, some recent, some showing interiors of homes that weren't 317 Edgewood. Names began to surface, victims, clients, transactions, and then Rutledge's personal directory. One document titled Asset Dispersal Plan Phase 3, another labeled Contingency Fed Flag Response.
Mallory stood silent in the hallway, arms crossed. As agents worked the room, Pamela stayed outside now, sitting on her porch swing in stunned silence. No one was listening to her anymore. No one needed to. Inside, Moralik pulled Elijah aside. "You didn't just install a camera," he said quietly. "You opened a vault." Elijah raised an eyebrow. "Didn't even know there was a lock." Moralik gave a short nod. "There was, and now we've got the key." The shift had happened. The suspect was never Elijah. It was the house all along. By the next morning, the footage had already gone viral. Not the hidden drives, not the federal documents, but the moment Pamela pointed across the lawn, accusing a calm black man with a toolbox of acting suspicious. A neighbor had caught it all, her voice sharp, his quiet professionalism. The officers shifting focus as the scene unraveled. Someone uploaded it to social media with the caption, "He was installing a doorbell." She called 911. What happened next? Unbelievable. Within hours, it hit the local news. By nightfall, national anchors were reciting Elijah's name like a headline. Tech worker, Elijah James, mistaken for a burglar, uncovers fraud ring instead. Pamela wasn't named at first, but neighbors knew. People talk, and soon, her name floated into the comment sections, whispered in PTA group chats, dragged through Twitter threads like a warning. But she didn't apologize. She posted a long Facebook post, paragraphs of justification. "I was just trying to keep the neighborhood safe. You can't be too careful these days. How was I supposed to know?" She wrapped her fear in safety, her assumptions in concern. But it didn't land. Comments flooded in, some kind, most not. "You didn't call because of safety. You called because of who he was. He handled himself with more grace than you ever will. You didn't just make a mistake, you exposed yourself." The next HOA meeting was tense. Pamela didn't show, but Elijah's name came up more than once. Quiet nods. Some even stood to say thank you, not for installing tech, but for keeping his composure, for showing what dignity under pressure looks like. He hadn't spoken to reporters, hadn't posted anything online. No press conferences, no victory lap. When a local news crew found him leaving a job site and asked for a quote, he paused, then said only, "I was just doing my work." They asked if he was angry. He looked off for a moment. "I've been followed. I've been questioned." This wasn't new. What was new was how it ended. That clip aired on every station that night. Moralikas watched it from his apartment, arms folded, TV remote untouched in his lap. The house was still under investigation. Federal agents were still sorting through the data. But in a way, the bigger story had already been told. Because one woman's fear had tried to label a man a threat, and instead, she'd lit the match that burned through a whole network of lies. Not everyone saw it coming. But Elijah, he'd seen it before. And this time, the world saw it too. The community center smelled faintly of coffee and floor polish. Rows of folding chairs faced a modest podium, flanked by a folding table stacked with flyers. Understanding bias, neighborhood, watch redefined, building safer spaces for all. The turnout was better than expected. Not packed, but full enough to feel weighty. Teachers, retirees, small business owners, even a few teens slouched in hoodies near the back, earbuds still in. The mood was mixed, apologetic, curious, tense in places. Pamela wasn't there. Her porch had been quiet for weeks. A for sale sign had gone up 2 days prior. But Elijah came, not in a suit, not with notes, just in his secure smart polo, jeans and quiet steps that carried more than they showed. Moralikas was there too, leaning against a wall, off-duty but listening. The moderator introduced him softly. Elijah James, community member, business owner, and someone we all should have seen more clearly, sooner. He walked to the podium without hurry. The room hushed, but not out of obligation, out of attention. He cleared his throat once, glanced down, then looked out over the crowd. "I wasn't supposed to speak," he said. "I was just supposed to install a doorbell." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter followed. He didn't smile, but instead, he continued, "I found myself explaining who I was, just to do my job. Some people saw a threat where there wasn't one. Others saw a man doing a job, and looked deeper. And what they found was something that needed to be seen." He paused. His voice stayed level, but firm. "The truth is, it could have gone differently. It often does. I'm grateful it didn't. But let's not pretend it was just luck. It was choice. Someone chose to call, others chose to listen, and somewhere in between, the truth got its chance. Then he said it. Sometimes Elijah said, the one they fear is the one protecting them. The silence that followed was full, not heavy, not angry, just real. He didn't stay long after, shook a few hands, thanked the moderator, left before the cookies were passed around. But the cameras he installed, they stayed. They blinked quietly from porches and door frames, steady and unblinking, watching, not just for packages or porch pirates, but for patterns, for accountability, for the moments when someone assumed too much, and someone else stood still anyway. In the weeks that followed, the homeowner, Alan Rutledge, was indicted on multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction. His shell companies unraveled, his assets froze, and Briarwood Estates, it changed, not overnight, not dramatically, but people paused a little more, asked instead of assumed, looked for signs, not of danger, but of decency, and every time they passed 317 Edgewood, they remembered. The cameras had always been there, but now they knew who really saw them. If this story moved you, if it made you pause, reflect or see something more clearly, don't let it end here. Share this video, start the conversation, because real change doesn't begin in headlines, it begins in neighborhoods. And if you believe in stories that expose truth, challenge bias, and lift quiet heroes into the light, subscribe to Black Roots. More stories are coming, and some of them are already happening on your street.